So what I'm going to do is basically wrap up where we've been. So you've seen a lot of speakers talk about all the different parts of this. I'm just going to bring that all back together. I'm going to talk about the offensive part, I'm going to talk about the defensive part, and I'm going to talk about where I think it's heading next. You've had a little bit about me. I guess a little bit more background might be in order. So I've been part of the defense innovation community for about 30 years, on and off. Hey, SOFWERX. I speak at Black Hat, DEF CON about things like how algorithms control human beings. And this is very much about how algorithms control human beings. It's very much about new work that's emerging on how we negotiate those controls. But we are where we are at the moment. That's coming next. I also talk about ethics and, adversarial machine learning ethics, which is it's also part. But I get interested in stuff. I go on little 5-year campaigns. My current 5-year campaign is this idea that we have these massive hacks going on. And these massive hacks of population, of human beings. It's a different level of hacking. And what do we do about it? Another thing maybe is relevant is I used to play rugby. And what I found interesting in rugby is quite often you'd have two very matched teams. Tactically, technically, almost identical. But one team would just steamroller the other one because one of them just didn't play the bloody game. And I think we're there. I think as a group of nations, we're not even looking at the rule book right now. We're just thinking about maybe there's a rule book. Where the other side has a full-size rule book, a full-size playbook, they've got all the little plays marked out. We should get on with our TTPs. So let's get on with TTPs. So, practical influence operations. Let's go talk about some of it. Offense, where we are on offense. So you've seen a lot of this, Internet Research Agency. These guys are pretty damn good. They're not perfect, though. They have their own vulnerabilities we can use. So we're going to start off by just looking at some definitions. And by the way, this is not all about Russia. They are obvious as fuck, and I've got my first swear word out of the way. I swear in every talk, so we're good. And when I see a very obvious attack, I always look for the subtle stuff underneath. So pretty much everybody is attacking pretty much everybody else right now. There's 20-odd nations that you can prove the stuff on. And some of this is getting really interesting. You see bots. You see the really obvious bots you can spot really obviously. There's going to be some nice automated subtle stuff going on. I work on MLSec. I work on looking at things like how do you detect low and slow attacks. There is no reason those low and slows aren't being worked on against humans. So we got to deal with that. But OK, let's start. So I also tend to wander around a bit. If you've got a problem with that, raise your hands and go, oh my God. OK, we're good. Definitions. So misinformation. It's deliberately false information. It's deliberately false information that usually has an end goal. And we'll talk about end goals in a bit. Fake news sites, usually goal is profit. I mean, they range from the completely ridiculous Putin with aliens through to things that actively do harm. The last couple of years, I've been working with fellow Sol who, a pair of us have been tracking a lot of the incursions into countries. And we watched the first incursions. We watched domestic misinformation happening in Canada. We watched it starting to flourish, and we watched the Russians starting to camp on top of it. We watched QAnon camping on top of domestic, and then using American messaging on top of domestic, and then adapting it. So you're seeing things like this, which actually hurt people. So it's that sense of, what is this? What's it being used for? Where's it coming from? What are they using? What in the humans are they using? So if you're thinking of it, and I'm thinking a bit about it now, so part of what I'm looking at is this in terms of an InfoSec framing, because that's the closest framing I can find to give us an architecture to work from. And it's basically social engineering. Okay, that should say psychological manipulation of people into performing actions or divulging confidential information, which is a classic definition of social engineering. And there are arguments that influence operations are not social engineering, they're not the same thing. Actually, my feel is that influence operations are social engineering at scale, with the addition that it is not just a divulging of information, but those actions may be virtual action as well. I think it fits. So just looking at the scaling on that, and these are some of the things sent to Congress on those 2016 attacks. And we're seeing millions of shares. These are some of the groups that the Russians put up, and you're seeing this mixing. So everything from black activism through to Muslims, through to patriot stuff. And you're seeing millions of shares, you're seeing millions of interactions. Now, a lot of that is bot activity, but there's also a lot of real humans in there. So social engineering scale, you've been hearing a lot of that today. Wherever the hell he's gone, esteemed colleague there has talked a lot about that. And it's not insignificant. So this stuff has impact. Again, that's been talked about today. And those impact at different levels again. So it starts at individual level. It starts at this idea that, so we're seeing these test things. So, okay, back up slightly. One of the things I've worked on, and part of the getting disaster data taken seriously by big organizations, was I worked on collecting and building situation pictures from disaster data from 2010 onwards. And 2010 was the first time that we saw Russian test signals. And Kate Starbird from the University of Washington has done a lot of work mapping those signals. And that was the BP oil spill responses. There were test signals about tsunamis. They were just really strange. Every disaster, we saw these messagings that just like popped up out of nowhere. And so it was getting people in real world and disasters brilliant because you can inject stuff in real time and people respond in real time. So when people say this stuff started with the IRA in 2014, the social media side has been going on for a lot longer than that. Propaganda has been going on for as long as there's been humans. Country-to-country propaganda has been going on for, hell, this country's been doing it for long enough. But in social media, this has been not that recent. So here, you have in-world, real-world fights being started. Individual level. Community level, crises again. That shark. That bloody shark. I mean, it turned up this week in Australia. It's always the same shark. Actually, it's got a friend on this one. But this is funny, except what happens when you get these fakes, and sometimes it's the sharks, but the sharks are obvious, but you also get things like people put up messages with fake people trapped, or there are fake people in emergencies, or there are one of the disasters, there were reports of a bridge that was out. And it was a bridge that people needed to go over. And what this does is it diverts crisis response efforts. It diverts people's behaviors. It causes in-world, real-world problems. So that at the community level is causing trouble. QAnon, again, one of your favorites. We tracked all of the openly visible QAnon stuff till it went underground. And then we tracked a little underground and went, sod it, we'll leave them to it. But we were tracking things like this, which was the command signals for QAnon. QAnon was lovely because we got a lot of co-occurring signals on it. So if there was a new hashtag coming through that was going to cause trouble, we'd see it turning up alongside QAnon. People would just post the two together, and it was like, hey, good. Nice of you to share for us. I'll talk about that in a bit. So that's sort of like the levels. So it goes right from individuals being targeted through to nations. Global, sizings. So, sizings. How big? So we've already talked about cognitive biases. This, you're not supposed to read the slide. The point of this slide is this is a list of cognitive biases grouped by type. There's hundreds of the damn things. And the point about this is, as a hacker, these are threat surfaces. I could attack pretty much anything on that circle. I can use your cognitive biases against you. These guys can use your cognitive biases against you. I have some favorites. The backfire effect is one of my favorites. The fact that as a human being, if you take in a piece of negative information, you take it in as positive, then add the negative, which fires of all these traces across your brain and leaves the traces behind even though you've taken the negative out. I love these things. But they're all usable. So we haven't even started on the potential for hacks here. We haven't even started on the potential for community hacks here. What you're seeing right now is relatively crude. We're not even into the next. You should be pretty damn scared by now. If you're not, then, I need to work harder on this. And groups, because, Facebook, it's not just hitting individuals, it's hitting groups of people, it's hitting communities of people. And a lot of these communities have nice, crunchy outside shells. They're hard to get into, but once you get in, you can bounce around like a ball, throwing all sorts of crap around. And everywhere, sites. Anywhere you get user-generated content, anywhere somebody could put a comment, somebody could put a message, somebody could put an image, somebody could put a video, literally like banking comment streams, is targeted. And we're not talking about the bad guys really nicely just putting their stuff on Twitter and leaving it there, or just putting their stuff on Facebook and leaving it there. This is about you spread it across everywhere. This is about getting subtle about how you attack. This isn't about, hey, I put the stuff up and, I just kind of, leave it there for you to find and trace. Just, God no. You put it up, you let it propagate, you take it out again. You learn something from those cognitive psychology effects. You just replicate that online. It's not hard. But, and targeting everyone. You can get a long way with a decent botnet. And when I say a decent botnet, this is a price list, and these are pretty expensive. You've got like 1,000 bots for $150. But these are good bots. You can buy, 1,000 newly created Russian accounts, which we found pretty quickly for a couple of dollars. But for $150, I get a set of mixed accounts, possibly stolen. They're all of different ages. They've got some back history to them. And this is recorded, but what the hell. And if you set up a couple of these, and they're nicely mixed, you can use these as canaries. And you can watch as Twitter or Facebook start doing takedowns, as platforms start doing takedowns, and see which of your bots get taken out. So it's a really nice way to see how well the other side is doing. So it's, and you buy 100 good bots, you can get yourself into the game, and you can do a really nice, long, low and slow attack. Get a nice long game. 100 people is still a good amount for injection into community. 10,000 bad ones will get you a really good short-term attack. It's short, but it can be pretty effective if you just want something fast. And advertising techniques, it's all there. Learn all about reach, learn all about virality, get on with it. So, this is not rocket science. No, this is basic psychology. This is a bit of basic maths on the back end. This is just, you can find these places pretty fast. Okay, so, it's not so easy anymore to use like a hidden credit card on these, but that's another story. But it's possible. And now Bitcoin's crashing, that's going to be a little easier too. Anyway, so who's doing this stuff? Because, if you're going to take out these systems, you want to know who it is, what's motivating them, because if you're looking at this chain and you're trying to disrupt this supply chains start with the motivations. So, usual suspects, you've got state and non-state actors. Again, they've been spoken about this morning nicely. Generally, their aims are geopolitical in some form. Russia, or whatever the hell they're going to call themselves once they've eaten up all of the buffer zone, generally, they know what they want. Now, I have my own feels on what I think they're going to want and when they're going to stop, but entrepreneurs, generally in it for the money. So these are the people who will put up fake news sites. They will put loads of advertising slots on those sites. And every time an eyeball, as in a person, looks at one of those pages, those sites get filled up with adverts, and they get paid for every eyeball on every advert. They make money. Thousands per month is pretty good if you're in a country where tens or hundreds per month is a large amount of money. And grassroots groups, your right-wing trolls, sometimes in it for the laugh, sometimes in it for power of some form, sometimes in it for the chaos. You've seen graphs like this in the first talk, where you see sort of separations of communities, separations of opinions. Quite often that's the aim. And then you get private influencers, the sharks on the subway. So one of those shark images for one of the disasters was tracked back to a guy in Scotland who just did it for a laugh. And he just wanted the likes. And one of the things we did as mappers online, who were mapping social media and keeping an eye on what was going on during disasters, where we go and find these people and quietly please tell them to take things down. And just try to stop the flow of these things. I ran deployments to stop the flow, and we did okay. One of the best things to deploy is Australian humor. But I digress. One thing that's getting interesting here is that there are interactions between these. So it's not just one of these. I have a clicker. This guy produces one of these. This guy gets one of these. What we're seeing is some really interesting chains across here, where you get something like a guy in America, private influencer, produces some text because they want some likes. But then the entrepreneurs who are in another country whose English isn't so great find the text, put it up on their site, and drive people to it for the money. But then that's pretty useful for some of the state actors. And the entrepreneurs are pretty damn good at things like A/B testing. So you then get the grassroots groups that are then affected by those as well. So you get these linkages between them all. It ends up, it's like this enormous Nerf ball of what the hell is going on here. But this is part of our fun, is dealing with these interaction effects. So that's the offensive side. And just looking a little at the defensive side. So normally I would just talk through that and then talk a little on defense and wander off. But I figured, today we should be talking about, now what the hell do we do? So one of the most interesting comments I got in one of my talks, and I talk about different aspects of misinformation with different communities, was somebody who just said, isn't this just like spam? Won't they just fix it the way they did spam? And it was just like, yeah, maybe, but we're the they. So it's like, okay, fine. So spam is a bunch of email that you don't want, that people are putting out for profit, that some people are dumb enough to click on. Okay, could it be? Could it be that easy? TLDR, no, but it's not a bad idea. It's not a bad thought. There are some correlates. My thought is that the response, again, as everybody today has said, has to be a mixed response, has to be a collaborative response. And that looking at it from a military background with that mindset is we have long-term strategic response. So we have policy that needs to go into place. I mean, part of this is nobody actually knows what the hell to call it. Nobody really knows legally what to call the response. It's not war. I mean, I've already kind of this week written like an annoyed post saying, this isn't war. It's it's part of hybrid conflict, but it's part of other stuff. I don't have answers to that yet. But there's that. There's an education piece that needs to go in, but that works in some countries but not others. There's a whole bunch of that level. There's the tactical response, which is where we've been spending a lot of today talking. It's like, what tactically do we do? And then there's the execution level, okay, we're going to have to do this fast level stuff, oh shit, there's deepfakes coming through. We're sitting on these streams, what do we do now? So, staying over at tactical. I started looking at information security responses. I started talking to hackers. I started trying to see if there was something in there we could start adapting and using. Not just because it gave us an architecture, so that we could start at least writing down what the game was, and then start working out what the gameplays were, but also so it gave us something that we could look at and go, shit, we missed a piece. And I actually, TLDR, I missed some bits. So this is Gartner framework. I've been finding this useful. So I'm just going to look through a couple of pieces of this. So prevent it happening. Hardening systems, hardening humans. Again, seen some of that this morning. Detection, there's a lot of work on that at the moment. There is so much work on detecting whether misinformation is happening or has happened. It's like you've seen it. Okay, now you're going to have to do something. So response. Prediction, we're not there yet at all. But I think we need to be aiming that. We need to aim at, okay, we have a sense of the goals of the other side. We're within this game. We have to play this game. We have to do this loop. Everything leaves artifacts. And misinformation is no different. One of the weaknesses of hacking is you leave information about yourself. One of the beauties of misinformation is you're actively chucking out information. So, helps people find you. This is just a screenshot off something called Bot Sentinel, which goes out looking for obvious bots. Things that are tweeting way faster than humans can, the things that are repeating information, yada. And I've been working, God, what the hell happened here? Okay, I'm probably going to have to read the slides to you because some strange things have happened. So, I work with the Credibility Coalition, and this is one of the standards bodies that's forming around misinformation. We're also part, I guess, sisters, because the same people are on the W3C standards body for misinformation too. It just happened that way. And one of the things we worked out pretty quickly was a lot of people and organizations have got really stuck on the idea of we've got to be able to work out whether something's fake by looking at the content. And it's like, yeah, okay, I'll show you a page. You tell me if it's fake. It's just like, context free. Just tell me if it's fake. And okay, that's Putin and the aliens, you can tell. But a lot of fake information is contextual. It's fake in the way it's presented, the way those deepfakes were presented. The Obama video was presented out by clips and presented out of context. It's fake amongst those chains. So we split that into content and context. So there are still content parts, so those co-occurring hashtags are useful. Correlated text, if you see the repeated text coming through. URLs. URLs are really handy because if you've got something that's being driven to, especially if you're talking about the fraud, so you're looking at the fake news sites, or if you're looking at something you're being pushed towards. So things like Jenna Abrams. Jenna Abrams was a very famous blogger who turned out to be a Russian sock puppet. And it would be, high heels and fashion, high heels fashion, high heels fashion. Let's talk about Ukraine. High heels fashion, Crimea. And it was really quite nicely done. And she was retweeted by Vogue, the New York Times, like major outlets because of the high heels fashion stuff, because they crafted these beautiful little snippets that fitted really nicely into modern journalism. And they just didn't spot the propaganda hiding in amongst it. So it's like hunting for those, hunting for stories. And stories are interesting because there are already groups like Snopes who are tracking stories. So there's like a whole industry around that already. But that's not enough. And that's where we start talking about context artifacts. I've just come from a major ad tech exchange. So I got to see a very large proportion of the eyeballs looking at pages on the internet. I played in petabytes, very large amounts of data. And some of the things you got there were these patterns. So some of the context you have out there are things like botnets and trolls you already know about. There's context. They're pointing at stuff. Is that stuff that's of interest? You have rumors you already know about, so you've already had people talking about those. The friends and follows. Who is following this? Not just are they people you already know, but are there structures in there? So back to my crisis days. When we had a new source coming on, we would always, if there was new information, we'd always triple verify it, of course, but we'd also verify the source people, and we would check their social media accounts to see if they had interesting follower patterns, like suddenly one day they get 200 followers. It's more subtle than that now, but it moves on. Retweet-like patterns. Some of the metadata, some of the DNS data, there are correlations across the advertising tokens. There are little traces all the way across the systems, if you can get at those systems. So those are useful. So this is double part. And then, of course, there's always our old friend of following the money. And this is an ads.txt. So this is back again to the fraud site, and you'll see me bounce, from the people making money off this to the people making geopolitical gain, because they both, in the end, screw up the same population. And ads.txt tells you which advertisers are allowed on this website. And these are useful, not necessarily because, whether they exist or not is a useful indicator of quality, because any fake site worth their salt knows they have to put one on, or the big advertising exchanges won't let them on. But they are interesting because you have signatures here. So again, as a signature, you can follow where the money is going, where it's coming from. You start getting a sense. That, by the way, is how I ended up at an advertising exchange as a data scientist. I was following the money, trying to shut down some of the money flow, because to me that was just one of the ways we could respond to this. And which gets me to the next piece. So we've just wandered through the detect part, now we're just going to wander through the respond part. Everyone still with me? Not in the post-lunch dip yet? Okay, cool. So I'm just going to talk through, I've talked through individual responses, community responses. I'm just going to talk through some of those pieces because they link through to what I think can be done on the larger scales. And I'll probably just, at the end, just talk through some of the beautiful larger scale things like the Macron team responses. But, okay, individual stuff. You can report trolls and botnets to the platforms. Yeah, you've seen this stuff before. But, yeah, it's kind of, it's hard. We've had this conversation. You can report fraud. So you can report a website that an advert that shouldn't be there is on a website. So say Nike is advertising on, this is Breitbart, it's like used to be one of the big baddies, but if it's on a fake news site, take their advertising money away from it. Sleeping Giants have been lovely about doing this. They're small, but hopefully they'll grow. You can do things like block. Again, I'm talking at the individual level because you can scale this up larger. So things like block together are just ways to individuals or groups to start blocking accounts, seeing accounts. And yes, I know this is not quite the same as taking down accounts, but there is some agency in this. The platform side is just like a little laundry list. Removing non-human traffic, because we're not allowed to call them botnets anymore, we should call them non-human traffic. Yeah, I mean, we've had that discussion again and again and again, how hard that is. So really, rate-limiting shadow banning is perhaps better. But I'm not giving up on removing non-human traffic because I've seen it done. And we've removed it from ad exchanges. There are some very good organizations that do that. People like White Ops do that. It's what they do. They hunt these guys down, they remove them. Part of my job was rate limiting things that were misbehaving. So, we can take this stuff out at lots of different places. We take the money out, take the views out. Communities. I love these people. These are Lithuanian elves. So this was an anonymous online group that decided they were going to fight back against the Russians. And their basic weapons are truth and humor. Remember I said earlier that one of the best things I deployed was Australian humor? So during one of the American disasters, I work with a group called VOST sometimes, and VOST Panama had done a Spanish language trial of using fake stickers to counter fake stories coming through. And we thought we'd try doing counters to fake stories coming through. And we had a day team and a night team. And the night team was a couple of Australians, and they just took the piss out of anybody putting up fake stories. And it kind of worked. And it's working for these guys too. So it's useful. The other thing that was useful, and this is Hurricane Irma in the American side, was that both FEMA and BuzzFeed kept running lists of known fake stories that people would go and look at. So there are some things. There are some things. There are also some things to be done on damage repair. So the Commons Project. The Commons Project are interesting because what they do is they deploy bots to go and find fractured communities. So these are people who have worked on peace tech. So these are people who have worked on the boundaries, the social media boundaries between fractured communities. So they do things like Israel-Palestine and North-South Cyprus. And they find people in those communities and start linking them to each other, finding common ground. So they use botnets to find the individuals, and then they use humans to follow up. And that's been quite promising. So there are some ways to repair, but you need some peace geeks to help with that. Community stuff, so the parody-based, we did some stuff like taking the piss out of Q, which was fun. There's a whole bunch of, you've got misinformation sites, you just SEO hack them, you put your sites up above them. There's a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. Diversions and hacks. But, engagements. We are here. Cuckoo's Egg, classic book about hacking. About a person who was sat in a lab, watched an attack go past. This is a classic moment in information security, an early moment in information security, where somebody realized an attack was happening, connected up with people, eventually turned into this industry. We are at that point right now. We are beginning the game, and we have to get our act together and move up rapidly. And one thing we're going to do is deal with the fact that these guys are adapting. Already they're adapting, and they're adapting faster than we are. So these three things, I'm part of the machine learning and information security community. This is another thing I do in my time. So MLSec Project, AI Village, Camlist, they're all part of the community that applies machine learning, artificial intelligence to InfoSec. So this tends to be, again, the attack, defend, the attack, the algorithms. Offense. What I think is happening next is we're going to get this mixture of algorithms and humans attacking algorithms and humans together. So attack the algorithms includes. We're going to change to, again, this has already been mentioned, this idea of trolls and bots. It's going to end into, it's already moving into these nudges of misuse of human communities, existing human communities, piggybacking on them. Those useful idiots. Subtle attacks. Low and slows, pop-ups. Things I mentioned as we're going along. We can do these. You're just seeing the unsubtle stuff right now. Multi-channels, already talked about, it's not just going to be one place. Commercial targets. Right now, you are seeing a very large country that's very, very, very well funded, the Internet Research Agency. You're seeing other countries with geopolitical aims that know that this stuff works for them. When that goes away, when they fulfill their aims, or when you manage to block them, please, you're going to end up with a group of people who know how to do this, who know how to make money from this, and will look for the next thing to do with it. Obvious thing, commercial targets. And you think they won't? Of course they're going to. Start thinking about where the next targets are going to be, because it's going to be not pretty. We've already seen attacks on Bitcoin. We've already seen some commercial target attacks. We're not seeing a lot of news about that yet. It's going to happen more. And it's already established. It's part of hybrid warfare. It's not going away. It's going to be part of your job. Both sides. And a bit in the middle. So really, my ask of you is just please stop being passive. So this is yet another InfoSec framework. This baby is the SANS sliding scale of cybersecurity. So over here, the architecture part where we kind of get all our systems together, think about our security, a bit of passive defense where we kind of secure our stuff. Active, where we're kind of actively looking for the stuff coming in, through to working out what's coming and actually countering it. We're kind of over here and we're not really filled up those buckets yet. It would be really nice to be here, playing the game, legally, sort of. But no, this isn't rugby. Got a heck of a lot more at stake than, please, I'd like a cup. Potential for next, we're going to have to work that strategic and tactical together, because unless we get the regulations in place, the tactical is not going to mean so much. Trusted third-party sharing. Again, David touched on this morning. You can do a lot inside the platforms, but unless the platforms are doing some form of data sharing, it's going to be a bunch of stuff missed. I've worked with small platforms who don't have those resources, and sometimes there's those conversations about, oh shit, we didn't see that one. There's some work I'm doing on, I've probably said it several times already, but on InfoSec frameworks, and I have tried fitting misinformation at the bottom of the attack frameworks, the MITRE attack frameworks, and it doesn't fit. But it does fit into the framework structure. So I think a version of that, we're not ready for top 20 yet. We're seeing the same attack styles again. So the technique, tactics, procedures, I think those are evolving enough now that we can actually list them. But we don't quite have a top 20 yet. Defense side, there's a correlate to algorithms humans attack algorithms humans. I think there's a correlate where algorithms humans can counter algorithms plus humans. I don't think we get to be just the algorithms counter, but the humans are going to overwhelm if they try on their own, so think that. We've got to think the unthinkable. And we've touched on firewalls a bit, decentralization. We've got to think about, what could we do? What might we have to do? This is population protection. Countermeasure and self-defense, that red box on the right end of one of those earlier scales. I'd love to do that, because hell, you got to hit these guys back, please. And just because, it's the end of the slide, so this is what I'm up to at the moment. So half my time I'm doing some anti-fraud work, so I'm working on misinformation framework, so I'm building global disinformation index. So we're working on how do we build indices across sites that platforms, ad agencies can use instead of building their own. So part of that info sharing. In my spare time, I'm doing this. I'm working on those infrastructure frameworks. I'm working on how this all hangs together. Yeah, and in my spare time, I go read, troll sites, whatever. And this is your part. Please don't fight the last war. This is Joey Brooklyn. Joey Brooklyn is a very, very famous troll. Very famous bot. And it's smart enough to have, a smart-ass response. But, if you take away from this that you ought to go hunt some botnets, it's like, that is not the answer. This is changing so fast. You need a framework. You need a way, something to hang your responses off. You need TTPs. Because this game is changing all the time. You've got to be part of the game, or you're going to be toast. You scared yet?